Welcome to our ongoing series, Women in DevOps. In this series, we highlight the stories and experiences of some of the most accomplished women in this field. From their challenges and their struggles to their accomplishment and successes, we take a closer look at how they have made an impact to the industry. So sit back and enjoy the show. Today's guest is Hannah Sutor. Hannah is a public speaker, an educator, and a digital privacy advocate. She has spoken at various international conferences on the subject of digital identity, privacy, cybersecurity, and DevOps workflows. Hannah advocates for digital privacy rights and empowers consumers with easy to consume practical tips of knowledge that they can apply. She's always had an innate sense of justice, and what's happening with our data is unfairly balanced, benefiting big tech industries and not us. You can reach out to her to take control of your digital footprint at hannahprivacy.com. I will leave it in the comments of this video. Without further ado, let's head over to Hannah. Hello, Hannah. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm good, Savinder. How are you?
Good, very good. Thank you, Hannah. And I know you're very busy, so I wanted to thank you first to take out time to do this. I really appreciate you, cutting out time from your busy schedule and jumping on this call. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for elevating women's voices in DevOps. I think it's super important, so I'm happy to participate.
Sure. Thank you, Hannah. So let me start off by talking about something that I read on your LinkedIn profile. You said that you're determined to leave the internet better than you found it, right? And you're a very strong advocate of digital privacy rights.
Yeah.
Right. So to a 5-year-old, how do you explain digital privacy rights?
Oh gosh. It's always the most difficult to distill something kind of complex down to something simple. So it sounds like it should be an easy question, but it's hard. I would say that there's when you spend so much of your life and your time on the internet, right, as we do in our world today, that you leave behind a trail that talks about who you are, and that version of who you are is just as real as the physical person. So we need to make sure that the people who can see that trail that we leave is people we want, and that it's being used in a way that is positive and good in our lives and not for negative purposes.
Okay. So let's say I'm an average Joe, I'm not a multi-millionaire who somebody would want to steal from, right? I have a job, I have a business, or maybe I'm a student, I have some savings, I manage a good life, right? Should I really be concerned about digital privacy? I mean, what's the worst that could happen to me?
Yeah, I think this is a common sort of rebuttal I can hear sometimes of, I have nothing to hide, right? Like, they can have my information, I've got nothing to hide, I'm just your average person. And I think the scariest thing to me is that whether we realize it or not, our digital footprint is being used to manipulate what we see every day on the internet. And that is what's concerning. So if you care about sort of seeing things in an unbiased way, or you want to learn about all the world has to offer and not just what these companies think you're interested in, then I think it's important to care about that digital footprint and your privacy. And then, of course, there's the more cybersecurity focused concerns about, your accounts getting hacked, your identity being stolen, and things like that. So I think there's two sides to it. The sort of, unbiased information that can come your way if you start to clean up some of this stuff. And also the practical, no one wants to deal with getting their credit cards, having some stranger open a bunch of credit cards in their name. So I think everybody should care about it.
Sure. And we keep hearing news about credit card and other information being sold off or, being hacked as well. Yeah, I understand that. So tell me, as somebody who's getting conscious about this, what are the first couple of things that I should be doing, maybe immediately after watching this, that I gain a sense of responsibility? What are the quick one or two things that I can do to get started on this journey, and then I can take it seriously?
I think one of the most impactful things you can do is go to, there's a top 5, and I have this on my Instagram. I have the list of the top 5 data brokers. The data brokers are really the most problematic. They have so much information on you, and they are the ones that resell it to everyone else. So I think you can opt in to getting your data removed from the data brokers. You usually have to do some small proof that, I am who I say I am. And then they have a deletion process of, it takes a few weeks or something to actually be deleted from the data broker. But I think that's one of the first things you can do. TransUnion is a big one. They're what populate all those sites that, you Google someone's name and it then tells you their political party, their age, their address, their income. So if you can cut those off, it kind of like saves some of the spread of your information.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Could you quickly talk about what is a data broker and how do they use our data? What do they do with it?
Yeah, so data brokers are aggregating your information. So they will buy from other places where you input your information, and you'll agree, whether you realize it or not, in the privacy policy of something that, an app or something like that you download and use, that you're agreeing to share data with third parties. And that will usually mean a broker will buy it from that company. The broker then sort of aggregates a profile about you that says, I'm actually going to purchase some data from a data broker to find out what's really in there. But I've read some information about what it is, and it includes everything from, your income to your health concerns based on things you've Googled. So it's quite a robust profile, and it's worth a lot of money. And so companies will buy that data, and then that's how they can send you, show you targeted ads, or they can send you targeted emails or things like that.
Wow, that sounds scary. That's a lot of personal details. I probably won't want it out there.
Yeah, right. So, and it's tough because data is so easily copied, right? So even if we remove it from one data broker, it's probably already been sold so many times that it can at times feel like a problem that's impossible to solve. That's why I try to advocate being like reasonable about all of this, and it's never going to be perfect, but there are some things we can do to start taking back control of our digital footprint.
Sure. And Hannah, if you don't mind, do you want to talk about Hannah on privacy? What's your motivation for starting that, and what's the core offerings that you offer there?
So my motivation really was, I've always had like this innate sense of like when things aren't fair, and that bothers me, right? And so working in tech, I felt like, gosh, I've spent 13 years now in tech. I know a whole lot about how to make software, how to make these apps, what they're doing, but I don't understand what's happening with my data and how to like reel it back in, right? So I thought, gosh, if I don't understand this stuff, I know I have a lot of friends, we all have kids. We're worried about this for the next generation of our lives were only online from, college age on up, but these kids are having their entire lives online from the time they're in ultrasound. So what does that mean for them and the profiles that are going to be built from off of their data when it's a lifetime of data collection? So I think seeing the imbalance that big tech gets to collect all this data, resell it, and it's made them a lot of money. And I work in tech, so I'm not completely, anti-tech by any means. But I just want to educate and really advocate that people have a better understanding. So I'm determined to bring some of these super technical concepts down to being understandable by your everyday person who doesn't work in tech.
Sure. That makes sense. So let's dial back a little bit to the enterprise side of it, to the large technology side of it. So you've been exposed to that area as well, like you just said, right? So how is security being embedded in the whole DevSecOps thing or in the entire SDLC in 2023? What's happening? What's new in that in today's world?
So I feel like I really can speak to this better from my expertise is in identity and authentication. That's what I work in at GitLab. So there's also like this security piece, like you're saying DevSecOps, right? Where the security is built into the development process. My expertise isn't there as much as it's on more of securing the DevSecOps platform itself. And authenticating with that system and making sure it's secure and making sure that, for example, our customers aren't the next ones on the headlines for having their repos, stolen and published on the dark web. So that's really what security means to the persona I serve in my job right now, is that they want to make sure that their intellectual property in the form of their code is protected.
Okay. So what's the latest in that area in the last about a year or so?
So what I've seen gain a lot of adoption really quickly, and I actually first heard about it was about a year ago now at a conference in Silicon Valley. Everyone was saying like WebAuthn is a thing. It's going to be big. It's going to really get adoption. And I came back to my team and I was like, I think we need to implement WebAuthn. And even a year ago, hardly anybody was doing that. But then I think it was May, Google, Apple, and Microsoft all announced that they're going to support WebAuthn. It supports like a physical hardware key, a YubiKey, but it also supports a face scan that we already all use mostly on our phones, the fingerprint scan that you use on your phone. And so it's kind of seen as like paving the way for passwordless authentication. So it's thought that if you support WebAuthn, you can use your fingerprint to scan into something. You don't have to use a password. And the realistic implementation I've seen of it thus far is not pure passwordless, as much as it's using that WebAuthn for a second factor. The SMS two-factor is considered on the outs, right? It's too easily compromised. And this WebAuthn second factor of either using a hardware key or using your biometric signature to authenticate is what's the latest and the coolest. And I think it's really good because it's also super usable, right?
Sure. And I know that you work in GitLab, and GitLab is one of the front runners in this area as well. So do you want to talk about that a little bit? What is GitLab doing, which is revolutionary in this area?
So at GitLab, what I think we've done that's been pretty revolutionary is our adoption of WebAuthn internally. And we leave it up to our customers if they want to implement this, right? We're not, we support it in the product, but we're not automatically forcing anyone into adopting it. So what we did is we had a big push internally to use WebAuthn for your second factor to log into our product. And within a week, they decided we're going to do it. We're going to rip the Band-Aid off. And within a week, they went from something like 2% adoption internally because everyone was using SMS or they were using OTP. But they decided we're going to use WebAuthn instead. And within a week, we went to 94% adoption internally. So that was cool to see that it can be done.
Yeah. So do you think that is a real possibility in large enterprises as well today to use it for the second factor authentication? At that scale, do you think that that's possible today?
I do, but I'm also cognizant of the fact that I think it's important to remember in identity and authentication space, like accessibility, and that not everyone has access to an iPhone, right, to issue these biometric credentials. So I think it depends on sort of the company where everyone's located. Do they have access to internet? Like, I want to keep that in mind too. I think it's important to remember that there's still a long way to go when building these authentication mechanisms for people who like may not have a phone in general, right? We're making an awful lot of assumptions that someone has a phone, it's connected to the internet, it's up to date enough that it has the fingerprint scanner, right? So I think you need to know your company, but yeah, there's still a long way to go there.
Sure, sure. But I think it's moving in the right direction. Yeah, we're talking the right things. It's making it more accessible.
Yeah, for sure. It is. It is. I'm also passionate about like inclusivity and identity and making sure that it's not just the same echo chamber of people who are developing all these things and then forgetting about, a large chunk of the world who may not have access to some of this stuff.
Sure, sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Sure. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about building career in this field, in this area of security and DevOps. So what would your advice be to somebody who's interested in building a career in security or DevOps?
I think to understand how software is made these days, and that's via DevOps and getting really familiar with a DevOps platform, making your own little projects, I think is really valuable if you can speak to the entire software development lifecycle. So I think that is one way to get started, is just to start dabbling and doing, and you don't need a whole lot of maybe I feel like, sort of getting your hands dirty and getting into it is probably a better way to learn than to do a whole lot of theory or reading, although that's helpful too. But I think having something to show, I did a panel for a tech boot camp recently, and it was all about, sort of landing your first job and how you do that. And I was trying to tell them that having some projects is like infinitely more valuable than to just be educated on the theory of building software. And there's really low barriers, right? GitLab has a free tier. I think GitHub does too. If you're just dabbling in personal projects, like you don't even need to spend a dime to do this stuff. You can sign up for a free GitLab account, and then you would want to do something like a tutorial that would show you some basics of, making a repo. But of course, and doing some basic CI/CD stuff. It doesn't have to be a groundbreaking thing, but just being able to say, I took something from an idea that was either in your head or someone else's head, and then you build it, and here's what I learned, is super compelling. And I also think it's like what drives most of us, right? Is that ultimately we're creators. I always say in tech, it's really no different than being an artist, except that your medium is just code. Because we're one of the few professions that truly take something from an idea and then turn it into reality. And then the cool thing about tech is that it's so scalable that, you can have thousands of people using your app.
Wow, I love that. We are creators with the medium of code. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Very, very well put. Yeah, I love that. So Hannah, before we started recording, we were talking about the perspective of women and DevOps, right? So do you want to talk about that a little bit? In your experience, what's the innate capabilities or innate advantages that women bring into this field? And I'm not being biased here by any means. There are certain characteristics that women are better suited to, and men have to do a conscious effort to learn and adopt these. But what makes women better suited for, let's say, security teams or DevOps team? What's your thought on that?
So I work with a lot of really awesome women. And when I think about sort of what may come more naturally to us, excuse me, I think connecting everything back to our users, right? Like it's really easy to get caught up in the cool tech and scalability and the awesome and latest and greatest tech to use. But I think unless you're bringing that back and creating value for the end user, it doesn't really matter. So I think always connecting everything back to our users and getting a good understanding of like how they're using something and what aspects of their DevOps tool matter to them, right? We can put in a lot of effort into an area that, I think is important, but unless I get out and talk to the customers and really understand if it's important to them, it could all be wasted effort. So I think it's that element of finding the why behind what you're doing, and also having that empathetic ear and listening to, what really are their challenges, and then thinking about how you can solve them before you run in with a solution to a problem that might not even exist.
Perfect, perfect, beautiful. So, and I'm trying to wrap everything up now. We've had a fantastic conversation. Final question. You've been in this security related area for a little over a decade now. Any regrets, and would you do it any differently if you were to do it all over again?
Well, one of my regrets is not really as much related to software, but it's just that I should have traveled more when I was younger. I would say that to every like any person in their 20s, like just please travel the world. Made especially easy now if you're in DevOps with remote work, right? As most companies fully support a remote lifestyle. So that would be one. I think security is really exciting, really growing. It moves so fast. And I would have liked to have gotten into it sooner. I've been in tech my entire career, but really only got into authentication and security maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I've really seen it grow as an industry. And after COVID, I went to some conferences and realized like, wow, here's an entire conference full of people in the identity space. Whereas I kind of, for a while there, felt like I was on an island of like, I was the only one in identity. And so I would say find your people and meet them and really grow that sense of community. So that would be another thing I would advise early on. If you are feeling like, gosh, I work in this niche of tech and within tech, I have a really specialized skill set. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I would say find others and you'll realize you're not as alone as you think you are.
Perfect. Find your tribe.
Yeah.
And then you can do your kumbaya.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes sense. Perfect. Perfect. Thank you, Hannah. This was really interesting. I think you've shown a lot of nuggets through the conversation, right? And people who are interested in data privacy or who didn't care will start caring about it now. And you've also given a lot of good career insights on how to think about this and how to approach about it from a very practical standpoint. So thank you so much for this conversation. It was really nice having you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was fun.